Good evening, everyone. We're live in Efrat, the weekly Zera Shimshon class. Baruch Hashem, our learning has continued to provide show Yeshuot and show great things, and we've already seen that hopefully, Zera Hashem, the beginning of the light at the end of the tunnel, as we see already things are already changing in the global perspective. So B'ezrat Hashem, as we start Shemot, which is really the entire Sefer, is a Sefer of Nisim and Geula. Let's B'ezrat Hashem start seeing those things as well soon, both publicly as well as privately. We're going to start with a short drush of the Zera Shimshon, which is Drush Gimel, the third one. It's a very short one. It's based on a midrash in Midrash Rabbah, as well as based on a pasuk in this week's Parsha, one of the first psukim of this week's Parsha, but it's also based on, we go back to Parshat Vayigash, already in Parshat Vayigash, we see that it says already there that Bnei Israel already, it says that Bnei Israel paru vayishvetzu, it says Bnei Israel, in Parshat Vayigash it says Bnei Israel paru vayishvetzu vayirbu, I believe it is. And the question becomes, that's in Parshat Vayigash, and then here in this week's Parsha, we see that in this week's Parsha it says, the pasuk, the seventh pasuk Zayin of Perek Aleph, it says, Uvnei Yisrael paru vayishvetzu vayirbu vayatzmu ma'od v'timilei ha'aretz otam. Right, we know that Bnei Israel were fruitful and multiplied, and they became strong, and the land filled with them. And the question is, why does the Torah repeat so many of these different languages and so many of the expressions? If we look in the Midrash Rabbah, the Perek Aleph of Midrash Rabbah and Sefer Shemot, the 12th lesson, 12th Torah, I guess you will, it says that we know that Paro tried to reduce the population size of Bnei Israel, and every time he tried to reduce the population, the exact opposite took place. Everything he did, the exact opposite. And what happens in this Drush, which is a short one, the third Drush Gimel of Sefer Shemot, the Zera Shimshon is going to go through how each one of the words, paru, vayishvetzu, vayirbu, vayima'od, vayatzmu, vayima'od, ma'od, really... The mic is this way? Yeah. There's the mic, okay.
Thank you, sir.
Is this better now? Okay. So, as we were saying, we're doing Drush Gimel, and we're going to look through the pasuk, the first pasuk of the pasuk that says, "V'nei Yisrael paru vayishvetzu vayirbu vayatzmu v'ma'od ma'od v'timilei ha'aretz otam." They were fruitful, and there's many words that describe what was going on. And the question is, why does the Torah feel the need to repeat itself in so many different ways? And the Zera Shimshon says, to remind us of all the different nisim that took place in Mitzrayim to the Jewish people. And as mentioned, the Mitzrayim were trying to find ways to reduce the population size of Bnei Israel, and in this Drush, the Zera Shimshon is going to go through what it mentions in the Midrash, which is Midrash Shemot Rabbah, and he says that every one of the words, paru, vayishvetzu, vayirbu, recalls one of the nisim that took place. We might be familiar with these nisim, when we were growing up, when we were learning for the Haggadah or whatever, for Pesach or whatever it is. But here, the Zera Shimshon is going to do is show how every one of them is exactly kind of hinting to the larger nace that was going on. And the idea here is to show that everything that the Torah tells us about and everything that the Midrash shows us is based on a part of something in the pasuk and something in the Torah. So that way, there's no sort of people might say, "Oh, how does the Midrash get this?" Or how did they get to this? Things like that. This is a very short one, but it's a nice one as well. So it goes like this. So he quotes the pasuk, and then it says, "Kafal kol elo shanot." We're doing the third Drush. The Ramos the Chol Nisim Shanasu to hint to us all the miracles that Bnei Israel that took place at the time. The first word he's going to go in order. He goes paru, and the word paru is similar to the word puriya. Puriya in the Gemara is not Puraya, which we know is in a mitzvah of Purim, but Puria. So Puria is the word, it actually means bed. And here this is what he says. Right? So the Mitzrim were trying to find ways to scheme or to kind of come up with clever ways to reduce the population size. So what would they do? So they would do is they would reduce the amount of the word paru. He's taking this, the Zera Shimshon is taking this from the Midrash, and the Midrash is saying is that the Mitzrim were reducing the population size by basically telling the men they can't go back to their house to sleep at night after a long day's work. So Vayu Nashim, and he only quotes Vayu Nashim ala Aretz. So the continue, if we actually look in the Midrash, but the idea is that the women would go to the field instead of just saying, okay, well, my husband is working hard and he can't sleep in the home. So the women said, no problem, I will fight that problem. I'll find a solution to that problem, and I'll sleep in the field. And if we look here in the Midrash, it says, Amru lahem anuksim, im atem olchim lishon bevatechem, ad shana mishalchim achrichem aboker, hayom oleh l'shav l'shtayim ve'in atem mishalmim et haschum. Right, so the enforcers were going to the men and saying is, you can't go home, because if you go home, you have to basically, you won't have enough time to match the amount of the daily amount of work that you have to do. Vayu shanim alar, so they would sleep on the ground. I'm reading from the Midrash, it doesn't appear in the Zera Shimshon, and it says, Amar lahem Elohim ani amarti lavraham avim shani marbeh bana b'kochavim. Right, so we know that Hashem says that tells Abraham that he's going to, he's going to be fruitful and multiply like the stars. And you, the Mitzrim, are trying to outsmart me. He says, let's see who wins this battle. Me, meaning Hashem, or you, the Mitzrim. Right? So he says, Miyad kasher yanu oto ken yirbeh v'chen yifrot. And he says right away, it's just like you would increase your hardships and your slavery, so too Hashem makes it that every time they enforced a new rule, Bnei Israel just became more fruitful. And he says, so the women would, the first step is paru. The first word is paru. And paru, shayu mekamim peria v'ria afal pisha lo hayu ba'im balaylo ve'tam, v'lo hayu yishenim ala mitah, shenikra puria, sheparim v'rabim aleha. So he says that they would, the women, and the Midrash goes quite extensively here, but he says that because, and he starts the tshuva to this by saying, Bischar nashim tzidkaniot, or bischut nashim tzadikiot, shayu b'oto ador, nigalu yisam mitzrayim. He says because of the women who were willing to do many things that were uncomfortable to them, but they realized that this is the goal, this is their opportunity here. So the women would do is,
waiting for the husband to come home,
which they wouldn't, right? They would go to the field, and they would be mikayem mitzvah piriya v'rivya in the field, and then that's the word paru, right? So paru we've just taken out. That's the step one. Vayishritzu.
So paru is really the Midrash is about the bed.
The bed itself, yeah. That's the chap there. The chap there is that the paru is the word like a bed. That's based on the Gemara, and then he says. Then the next one is vayishritzu. Vayishritzu we know is that a sheretz is generally not something very positive, and we usually associate with something not so great, or it's a creepy crawler, if you will, right? And it says the kevan since once they got to, they were ready to give birth, right? So it says the Midrash continues a few lines afterwards. It says kevan shemitabrot baot lavatehen. Once they get to once they've become pregnant, and they came back to their home. Right, as we know, as it says, right. So it says, vayishritzu is that they would go to the field again after doing part one. Step one was in the field. Step two, they go back into the field so that the Mitzrim wouldn't know about the baby being born, and they would vayishritzu is they would give birth as if a sheretz does is they give birth wherever they want. Same thing here, they're giving birth in the field and obviously in not optimal conditions. So he says the word vayishritzu here hints to the women giving birth in the field, like it says, as we know in Shir Hashim, it says tachat atapuach or aticha, under the tree, under the apple tree. That's where I right, awaken you, or whatever it is. So he's saying that's where the women gave birth. That's Vayishratzu. Now we have Vayirbu, right? And now we have it says Va'afal pi shesham haya sholet behem avir haolam vayu lahem lamut im kol zeh Vayirbu, right? What do we know about the field? The field is obviously not the ideal situation. Vayirbu, even though how they became pregnant and the fact that they gave birth in the field was already, we kind of established that. Now we could say, well, what about when the birth is actually take place? So when the birth takes place, Vayirbu, even so, even in the less than or suboptimal situation or conditions, Vayirbu Bnei Israel they were saved. Meaning the children were, they were increased. Meaning the children survived. They could have easily, right? We know that could have easily perished. Okay, so now the next one is Vayirbu, right? We just said Vayishratzu, Vayirbu, Vayatzmu, Bim'od, Bim'od, right? And they became strong. Vayatzmu is they became strong. What does that mean? The Midrash says, the Midrash here, where does he say that? No, he doesn't mention it right here. I might have to find it, but okay, we'll go back to Zera Shimshon. It says, "Ayu ba'im malachim unakim otam umishaprim otam kechaya zo mishaperet." Yes. Oh, yes. Right. Otam kichayav zoshem aperet the vlad shemar moldotaich b'yom hulet otach. So he says. So the Midrash continues, and the Zera Shimshon is saying this is where in this word it became strong is that the malachim would come down, and they would keep and protect the child while the mother is back at home and the father is out in the field. There were malachim that came down, and they would raise the child up. Right. So that way, what was the whole point of these malachim is so that when the manner that a midwife, what a midwife would normally do, this is what the malachim did. Kadesh yu briim v'chazakim, so that way they would become strength v'yatzmu, like milashon latzim, milashon like it's getting stronger. Okay.
The Midrash says about Shifra and Koach.
That's it. Also mishaprim, right?
And Koach, she would coup it then.
Right, exactly. So here, this is more about the general. This is even before that. This is where the Zera Shimshon finds hints to everything here. Then he says, "Kmo shamar Rabbi Chanin b'Masechet Shabbat, shemen shechtani imi be'alduti, hi amdali be'tziknikti v'zeu vayatzmu." Then the meaning they became strong. That the malachim would take care of the women, the children, at all times of the day. So that way the children so that way the parents could do what they need to do, and the children were growing in the normal pace. And then it says, Bima'od ma'od, and it says, it appears twice, the Ramos al Shnei Gulim. This is the Midrash. It says that the Midrash says that what they would find, Ma'od ma'od, he hints to two different, Echad shel shemen v'echad shel dvash, and marva yinikeu midrash bisela, right? And then
There's two types of ointments.
Yeah, two types of ointments. One was oil and one was dvash, and each one of them is some sort of food or some sort of sustenance. And the idea is that it allows them to provide them for food for each of the infants or the children that were born in the field. Now we're going to get to what's the point of this in a second, and then later on, now we have then it says Vatimalei ha'aretz otam. So now here the Midrash takes it literally. And the Timalei ha'aretz otam means that what happens, we know the Midrash, what does the Midrash say? That the Mitzrim, what would they do? They would go out to the field with Drush Gimel, the end of Drush Gimel. Drush Gimel is very, very short. We're going right through it, and then we'll go to something a little bit longer.
We'll have a
Right, okay. And then it says, so what do we know about the land? That because the Mitzrim were looking for babies, so what did they do? The land swallowed them up, right? We know that that's the famous Midrash, and that's mentioned here already, right? Once the Mitzrim realized the trick, once they realized the Bnei Israel's kind of idea, so what they do? It says that the Mitzrim said, "Oh, you're burying them in the ground? No problem. We're going to bring a plow to mamash pick them up. We're going to go really deep." And what does the pasuk in Tehillim say? Al gabi charshu chorsim. Right on my back, the chorsim, the plows came and tried to scrape me up, and that's the Midrash says it. And he says the v'chevan shayu mekirim bahem hamitzrim ratzu laragam v'nasu lahem nes v'ayu nivlim b'karka v'zel v'timalei artotam shayu nivlim b'tocha. So what's the point of this little short thing? The Zera Shimshon here, I believe, is trying to tell us something amazing, or at least in my opinion. He's trying to tell us something about the nisim, every aspect of the of the entire story of Mitzrayim is one big nes. One big nes. There's multiple nisim that we see about the Midrashim, but what the Zera Shimshon is really trying to tell us here is he's trying to tell us that everything that we learn about the Midrash and everything that we learn about, that we hear about these stories and things like that, are based on words in the Chumash. It's not just some rabbi who says, oh wait, let's just, I'll come up with an imaginative or creative thing. There are psukim, there are Torahs, there's Gemara about it and things like that. So he's trying to show that even one of them, the paru means that they were, let's call it supernatural growth. Vayishrutzu is that they gave birth in the field. Vayirbu is that they were able to survive. The children were able to survive supernaturally, if you will, above nature in the field, even though their parents weren't there or the malachim were taking care of them. Vayatzmu is that they were able to, the malachim provided them with the resilience and the strength to survive. Bima'od ma'od is that they were able to eat and they had food provided to them. And then vatimalei harazotam, and then the land filled them, is quite literally is that the land became filled with these children, and even though the Mitzrim were trying to find them, the Bnei Israel were able to survive even so. What the whole idea here is that everything here is hinted to in the Torah, just something, a quick, nice thing to think about when we're reading the Psukim. So that's Drush Gimel. Now, if you've enjoyed that, and that's a nice short piece, and someone wants to go take a break, you can go take a break. Let's do Drush.
Now, Mordecai, interesting to think about. The point that you're saying, okay, that everything could be learned from the psukim, and there was Yeshua in every aspect.
Yeah.
Right. But not always are we supposed to take the midrash.
No, we're not.
Literal.
No, we're not. That's true. I don't.
When you say, okay, they were sucked into the ground.
Right. I don't think.
It's more of the connotation.
Right.
Of saying.
Right. I don't think he's saying. It's nice to say. You're right. You could say.
We have to kind of put that in context of when
right.
you say you learn a midrash.
Right.
What are you learning from midrash? The Rambam says, "Mishalomed kapshuta." Right. So there's like.
Right. We can look at it two ways. One way you could say is we're not supposed to look at the midrash and say literally, because the midrash is just a way for us to understand or kind of grasp the amazing, awesome experience of what's going on in the Torah. Because the midrash does fill in some of the blanks, even so, though sometimes the midrashim are very difficult to understand. In fact, the Zera Shimshon several times says midrash pliya hi, that is like very much a wondrous midrash. But either way. What I think here is what I believe that the Zera Shimshon here is trying to show us is that everything that and the Midrash itself says is that every time Bnei Israel every time the Mitzrim were trying to reduce and to kind of enslave Bnei Israel more and more, Hashem said, "You trying to cut down my abilities to increase the population size? I'm going to show you more and more." Right, even if we don't take the midrash literally,
it's more about Dashkacha.
Right, it's right, exactly.
Kind of there.
Right, exactly. So that's what I think. That's the way I take out of that one. So now let's go to Drush Yud Gimel. Okay, so this is based on. Is there anyone here who's a Levi? Yeah. You're a Levi. Okay, so then you'll appreciate this Drush very much so. First of all, you're coming from the house of Levi, right? Moshe and Aaron were Levim, and so was Miriam, right? But second of all, so anyways, Drush Yud Gimel, the 13th Drush. Excuse me for a second. So we know that when Moshe, this Drush is based on the end of this week's Parsha. We just started with the one in the beginning with Drush Gimel. Now we're going to do Yud Gimel. And we know at the end of this week's Parsha, after the famous story or the famous maaseh of the burning bush, Hashem tells Moshe, "Go back to Paro and tell him, let my people go." Right? We know that's the famous statement. And Hashem tells him, "You got to go." So Moshe goes, and Moshe tells Paro to do it. And what does Paro tell him back? Tell back? He says, first time. He says, "Mi Hashem." I don't know who Hashem is. He starts coming up with answer. That's Paro telling this to Moshe. And then finally he says to him, Paro says to Moshe, "Stop bothering me. Leave me alone. Lechu l'sivlotechem. That's what the pasuk says. Lechu l'sivlotechem means go back to your work. Go back to your job. Go back to go back to your home. Go back to your suffering, and leave me alone. Rashi says, this is a Drush Yud Gimel. He says, Pasuk, Lechu l'sivlotechem. And it says, Pirush Rashi, Lechu l'melachtechem sheyesh lachem la'asot bevatechem aval melechet she'ibud b'Yisrael lo hayta al shivto shel Levi. We know there's a famous Midrash, or famous Rashi that is quoting in the Midrash, and he says that Shevet Levi were not Mishuabad. So then he says, Uferish Rashi Zal, Sha'ayta siba me'et Hashem lefi sha'atitim laseh mishkan la'avod l'mikdash. Rashi continues his Midrash, his Drush, and he says the reason why Levi were exempt from serving in Mitzrayim is because they're going to one day serve in the Beit HaMikdash or in the Mishkan.
By the way, even when in Bereshit, close by Yosef, buying all the lands.
Right, we're going to get to that. We're going to right. Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Because he says he exempts the.
Oh, one second. We're going to get there. Don't worry, you'll get there. Very good.
Over the whole Torah.
Right. Okay.
Really, yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, so he says like this. Perush Shaita Makshi. Right. So he says the reason why the money. There are many Mefarshim. Rashi doesn't say, but many Mefarshim say that the reason why the Levim didn't serve in Mitzrayim is because they're going to serve. Okay. So he says the reason why Levim, the reason why the Levim didn't serve. Rashi says the Levim didn't serve because Rashi is saying that Paro was telling the Moshe and Aaron to go back to their homes and go back to your home while Bnei Israel suffer. That's what he was saying. The many Mefarshim say the reason why Moshe said that, or why Paro said that, is because the reason why the Levim were exempt from service or being enslaved now in Mitzrayim is because they're going to be one day they're going to be serving in the Beit HaMikdash or in Mikdash or whatever. So he says, Makshim, the Maharal Miprag asked this question. It's not the first time that he quotes the Maharal, but the Maharal asked the question. He says, "Valo stama katuv ki ger yazarcha be'eretz lo lehem v'avadum v'niotam v'af shevet Levi b'chlal zaracha ve'ech efshar shelo nitkeim b'hem gzera zo." A very simple question. The Maharal asked the very question, and the Zera Shimshon asked his question as well. He says, "I don't understand. When Avram was told by Hashem in Brit Ben Abitarim, he says to him, I promise you that in a few hundred years, your children are going to go down. Zaracha, your children are going to go down to. You're going to go to a land that's not theirs, and they're going to be enslaved. It doesn't say your children except for Shevet Levi or except for some of them, or whatever word that, however the pasuk could have been written to say that it's there's an exception to the rule. Right. It's very clear that that Hashem is saying to everyone. That's the Maharal's question as well as the Zera Shimshon's question. And the Zera Shimshon continues. We have to explain it like this. Right? The pasuk should have read. The pasuk reads the way it reads now, and this is what we have to understand: is the pasuk says, and it says, right? So if the pasuk should have read, ger. Vavadum v'nuotam, right? The Zera Shimshon says, if I wanted to make the way I want to understand it, it should have said is that your children will be, your offspring will be in a land not theirs. It will be foreigners, ger, that means foreigners. Vavadum v'nuotam, right? And they'll be enslaved and they'll be suffer. Kulam bichlal vavadum. He says that would be when I read that pasuk the way I'm suggesting. Then I could say is everyone is included. Okay. But aval hashta, yes, exactly. Aval hashta the chatav ger bereisha v'achar kach ifsik v'chatav avadum v'nuotam mashma shegzerat hakatuv gzerat hagerut hayta kolel lechol mishehu b'zaro shel Avraham v'af b'shevet Levi nitkeim shayu gam hem mitgerim v'od v'avadum v'nuotam v'mishu ra'ui lavod v'no kolal lechol zaracha. So now if we read the pasuk and we look at the pasukim with the ta'amim. And this is what, unfortunately, we don't have the pasuk here, but when I looked at the pasuk a couple of days ago, the pasuk there, actually we do have the pasuk, we can look it up in Chumash, hold on. What Chumash here? So the pasuk, it's important to read it, because then you can really understand. Sorry for getting up in the middle of a thing. So he says, Lech lecha, it says, where are we? Yes, 15, okay. Tet Vav, 13. Okay, so it says, okay. So it says, Vayomer Avram. Hashem says to Avram, Yadoa teda ki ger yerzarcha be'eretz lo lahem. Right, there's a ma'apach pashta there. Not ma'apach pashta, what's the one with the little, that looks like a, this one. Eretz lo lahem. This thing. That's the
munach.
Munach, right? A munach and a zakef katon, right? And that usually indicates, what does that indicate? A small pause, like a small pause, right? So here, the way I understand the Zera Shimshon, and then it says va'avadum v'inuotam is the next statement. Va'avadum, the va means like an additional, right? There's like a separate thing, right? It's like the example I use is when I say I want milk and cookies. I can have milk and cookies together, or I can have milk and cookies on the table, but I don't have to eat them together.
So it's biscuits.